The reason for this video is not to recommend you buy any of these cards. This one is more for the people that are stuck with one of these and just want to make the best out of it. Some would argue that the HD5770 is not really a meme card, and while it did launch as a mid-range GPU, it did that more than 15 years ago, and time was not on its side. The HD6670 is an even lower power video card from the same Terascale 2 architecture as the previous one. Amazingly enough, this no extra power connector still runs GDDR5. As for my GT730, it gets nerfed by both using a Fermi GF108 instead of a Kepler GPU, and by the 2GB of VRAM, of the DDR3 variety. I tricked the R7250 into this video. I told it I was curious to see if a newer architecture, by comparison, coupled with longer driver support, makes it a better card than the others in this bunch. In reality, this mobile GPU with all nerfs associated with it, like 8 PCIe lanes and no media encoding, is promising meme material. The game I went for in this video is, as you could tell already, Fortnite. This title evolved in time and, at least lately, it added a few more modes developed by Epic to its initial battle royale. This smells a bit like an identity crisis, maybe sprinkled with a bit of fear over losing players. Or maybe it's just me. Now, while all of these cards ran fine in Chapter 2 Season 6, they might not work as well today, and the test system that will be used to find this out is comprised of a Ryzen 5 3600 CPU paired with 32GB of DDR4 running at 3000 MHz CL16 in dual channel. The first game mode that gets to give these GPUs a good workout is the main Battle Royale mode using the performance rendering mode, 100% render scale and the draw distance set to far. At 1080 resolution, none of these cards managed to clear the bar of 60 FPS for the 1% lows. Heck, only the HD5770 and the R7250 managed to get the average to the mid-40s. The game experience will range from annoying to I must be on candid camera. Props to the GT730 though, for having the 1% lows very close to the average for a bad but steady frame pace. Dropping to 1600 by 900 will not get the 1% lows above 60, surprising no one. However, the two more powerful cards have their average FPS closing into the 60 FPS mark, and the 1% low stays above 30. Good for single player and some of the mods of this game, like Havoc Hotel, but not for a battle royale. Last stop, 1280 by 720, and surprise surprise, the R7250 gets the 1% lows in the mid-60s and the average in the low 80s. The HD5770 comes in second, but unfortunately, while the average is a decent 73 FPS, the 1% lows is an indecent 41, at least for a competitive online shooter. As for the HD6670 and the GT730, the experience is good enough for the tourist experience. Parachute in, admire the sights, then the locals come with guns out and start shooting at you. The second game mode we'll cover, Fortnite OG, brings back the map from Chapter 1 Season 1. I can't tell if this one was introduced for the sake of nostalgia, or maybe the developers noticed that the increasing requirements are starting to edge out some of their player base. Using older assets definitely improves the performance as seen in the 1080 results. Unfortunately, this 30 or so % improvement is not enough to get the 1% lows for all cards above 60 FPS, though the R7250 is really close. The second performing card, the HD5770, manages to creep up close to 60 FPS, but only for the average. As for the other two cards, well, they are at the single player level of performance at best. 1600 by 900 gets the HD5770 to be almost good enough, with the 1% lows now in the mid-50s and the average in the mid-70s. The R7250 can definitely play the game at this resolution, as shown by both the 88 FPS for the average and the 71 FPS for the 1% lows. The HD6670 now reaches the tourist experience level of performance, with a deceptive average of 55 and a punishing 1% lows of 39. As for the GT730, it still thinks that just because I avoided other players, then Fortnite OG is a single player title, and performs accordingly. 1280 by 720 has the HD6670 performing almost good enough for this multiplayer game mode, reaching 52 FPS for the 1% lows and an average of 74. The R7250 and HD5770 have no problems running at this lower pixel count and provide 1% lows of 89 and 65 FPS and averages of 116 and 98 FPS respectively. This then leaves the GT 730 as the only one that tricks you into playing the game mode with its average FPS of 53 FPS to then whack you when you're most vulnerable with a 1% loss in the mid-40s. Fortnite Reload brings in a new game mechanic where players get rebooted back in the game as long as their teammates are still alive. The smaller map and smaller player count ends up balancing for a faster gameplay, but also for better performance. How much better, you ask? Well, 1080 resolution has none of these cards passing the 60 FPS 41% loss criteria, but two of them do start off with an average above 60 FPS, the R7-250 and the HD 5770. The 1% loss, however, tell a story that is well known by now. Both the HD 6670 and the GT 730 are to be avoided at this resolution. Their only salvation is going to be lowering the pixel count. At 1600 by 900, the best experience is provided by the R7-250, with the 1% loss in the low 60s and the average in the low 80s. With an average FPS of 82, the HD 5770 can trick you into thinking that it is safe to play the game at this resolution. Don't fall for it, the 1% loss is still in the 40s. The HD 6670 breaks the 60 FPS barrier, but only for the average. The 1% lows remain in the 30s, making for a similarly treacherous gaming experience. The GT 730 does GT 730 things, and treats Reload as a single-player game. Dropping the resolution further to 720 has the HD 5770 performing almost okay. The 1% loss is at 50 FPS and the average goes above 100. I could play like that. The R7-250 is, as expected, leading the pack with an average FPS that also goes above 100. However, the 1% loss is significantly better than with the previous card, sitting in the mid-70s. The 1% loss is in the 40s for both HD 6670 and the GT 730. Coupled with averages in the 60 to 80s, this makes the perfect recipe for a very emotional gaming session, especially when those 1% lows happen in combat. The last gaming mode, called Ballistic, should sound familiar. One team tries to plant a Reef device in either Zone A or Zone B, in a rather small map. The other team needs to prevent that or disable the device after being planted. This runs for several rounds, and each round gives you the opportunity to buy better guns and equipment. Yeah, because that's why one logs to Fortnite nowadays. Anyway, due to the significantly smaller map, the frame rates improve across the board, and at 1080 resolution, the R7-250 already runs its 1% loss above 60 FPS, while the average is close to 80. This is a good frame delivery already. The HD 5770 gets 76 FPS on average, with the 1% loss in the high 40s. This is a somewhat dangerous combination, but nevertheless a good sign, compared with the performance in the other game modes. Both GT 730 and HD 6670 are still in the realm of single-player titles, but with the HD 6670 performing a bit better. The frame rate improves at 1600 by 900, and the HD 5770 finally gets the 1% loss above 60 FPS. This is then coupled with an average of 99, so the game feels okay. The R7-250 runs even better with the two metrics at 87 FPS for the 1% loss and 108 for the average. The HD 6670 has still a bad 1% loss, but unlike with the GT 730, there is some hope here that the 720 resolution might have this card performing okay. And speaking of, 1280 by 720 does bring the HD 6670 into playable territory, with the 1% loss now in the low 60s, and the average close to 100. Both R7-250 and HD 5770 deliver a good experience now, with averages at around 150 and 120 FPS. It is, however, the 1% loss that makes the R7-250 the better choice, 116 compared to the 76 provided by the Juniper powered card. And lo and behold, the GT 730 can actually game. While not 60 FPS, the 1% loss of 55 is actually passable. As for the average, well, I'll let you comment on that one. Time waits for no GPU. When I published the first video on the channel, the HD 5770 performed quite okay at 1080p, with an average FPS in the high 60s. Now, the card is not really capable of running the main game mode, and is relegated to the other three, OG, Reload and Ballistic. And this is not just Fortnite. Think about CSGO being replaced by CS2. Heck, even Genshin Impact ran better in 2022 than how it ran in 2023. This trend is normal. Developers of software and hardware manufacturers will follow the same upward trend since they depend one on each other. Couple that with live service games and you can easily find yourself scratching your head. Huh? I remember this game running okay on this card. As for the card themselves, despite the HD 5770 having better performance, it might find itself less used than its lower meme siblings. Both GT730 and HD 6670 can do without an extra power connector, and this makes them still suitable for plain display adapters or for diagnosing various issues with PC builds. Basically, there is a gap between still useful as a display adapter and still useful for some gaming, and the HD 5770, like all GPUs that require extra power connectors, is slipping into that gap. In 5 years or so, however, the same HD 5770 might find itself wanted for retro builds. Heck, some even do crossfire builds with two of these puppies. But we're not quite there yet. Anyway, enough of me rambling on meme cards. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked this rather odd video, and I'll see you for